All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good buddy Chris Faraone. Chris is an independent journalist and the news editor at Dig Boston. He is the author of several books, including I Killed Andrew Breitbart, 99 Nights with the 99%. His new book, which comes out this week, is called Hizzonnaroo, The Fervent Feat and Street Fight to Replace a Boston Patriarch, all of which and more you can find at righttopower.net. You can also follow him on Twitter at Faraone. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for the proper intro.
I try hard to make sure it has a proper zing of someone of your stature, my friend.
Oh, well, yeah, for anyone, it's like, well, especially the pronunciation of Hizzonnaroo, so I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. So, all right, let's just start out with the obvious question. Why do you call this book Hizzonnaroo?
Well, I figure Boston politics, while not the smallest market there is nonetheless a niche demographic, so I'm not exactly worried about losing readers who might otherwise read it anyway with this arcane title. But where it comes from is, they call big city mayors, especially long ones, like say either of the Dailies when they were 20 plus years in Chicago, or a big city mayor, a Giuliani, an Ed Koch, a Mayor Tom Menino. They call them His Honor often. His Honor, of course, when spelled with two Z's, is kind of a take on his honor, and it's really something you wouldn't just throw it out there. You wouldn't just call any new mayor His Honor. But Tom Menino is somebody who, and I know not everybody loves the term, but he's somebody who really was referred to that quite a bit. As far as the latter part of the title, the Aroo, that's it's a reference to Bonnaroo, which I'm well aware that a lot of Boston politics junkies have not been to or even know about Bonnaroo. Nevertheless, I thought that just what it implies is really this fervent fete, as I've put in the subtitle, or really just this kind of it's a party. There's some fear and loathing. It's this big, ongoing, continuous, celebratory, Woodstock of sorts. That's really how I felt. This was one heck of a race.
It was just a giant festival of politics, and so it was actually this sort of festival of trying to actually find the replacement for this longtime mayor of Boston.
Yeah, so for those outside of Boston, Tom Menino, in office for 20 years, really was, he's one of these guys who a lot of people would argue that he was, corrupt for power, but certainly not for money. He's one of these guys who lives in the house that he bought when he was a city councilor, and it really was politics as usual for the most part of the past 2 decades. And my column that a lot of this material is derived from was called Politics as Unusual, and it ran in a newspaper called the Jamaica Plain Gazette, which is one of the last great bastions of community journalism in Greater Boston. And this really was, everything was unusual about it, and hence the uproarious nature of it. People just didn't know how to act or what to do because Menino had been in office for so long. So things got thrown. There were city councilors, for example, who were in their early 30s, who in an ordinary situation probably would have built their reputation up a couple of years before going and running for mayor. But since everybody had just grown up and only known this one mayor, at first there were more than nearly 24 people who threw their hats in the ring.
Yeah, it's also something very similar. I moved here from Chicago. I moved to Boston from Chicago. It's very similar where this is actually a type of a city like Chicago, where it really is sort of these sort of people they consider mayors for life, and kind of once you get, at least in recent history, who knows how it's going to go with Marty Walsh, but it's sort of like once you get your claws into this office, you pretty much can have it, barring some major scandal, you probably have it for as long as you want it, theoretically. We'll see how that actually works. Hopefully, I'm knocking on wood in Chicago that they get Rahm Emanuel out, and so far, we've had a month of Marty Walsh so far. But it's very interesting that in a city that's so progressive, theoretically progressive like Boston and Chicago are, that once you get that power and get that grasp of it, it's pretty hard to get someone to actually get them out of actually the office that they once they're there, essentially.
Yeah, and I think to Chicago, I do visit a couple of times a year, and I have friends who cover politics there, and that really will be a test as to how solid the hold on that office is. I mean, to say that Rahm Emanuel's tenure has been controversial would be the understatement of the year. I mean, he's really got huge swaths of the population there that are against him, and I believe rightfully so. As for Marty Walsh, I do think that this really was legitimately built on a very broad coalition of people who came together, many from the labor movement, but many, who were not from that. He represents a neighborhood called Dorchester, for those outside of Boston, that, it's a huge neighborhood. It's a fifth of the electorate here in the hub. So, definitely there's the potential to do that, so long as he doesn't, screw up big time. But, from a progressive standpoint, it looks to me like, there will be people who are never satisfied, and I applaud them for always putting that pressure on. But I think that it looks like Mayor Walsh is definitely heading in the direction of making a lot of people who are otherwise disappointed with some of the more neoliberal policies of the Menino administration, of making them happier.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking again to my buddy Chris Faraone about his new book, Hizzonnaroo, the fervent feat and street fight to replace a Boston patriarch. One of the chapters in the new book, actually, you again, and this was all from your coverage, because actually you were one of the only, there wasn't a ton of coverage of the mayor's race, but you were also someone who was covering it from the very beginning when all these candidates were jumping into office. One of the chapters you write in the book, you actually talk about Grover Norquist, which most listeners probably know who Grover Norquist is. Crazy right-winger, very famous for getting right-wing candidates to this day to sign pledges that they will not raise any taxes. Now, you actually wrote how while the Norquist pledge is clearly horrific because we need taxes to pay for things like roads and schools and all that kind of stuff, you actually write that there's something that I agree with, that progressives can learn from, like, the Norquist playbook. Talk a little about that.
I think progressives, and I know especially a lot of people who listen to your show, they should be insanely jealous of Boston. Especially considering some of the crazy Tea Party candidates we get in some major cities, even ones that aren't considered Republican strongholds. Boston really is, in a lot of ways, the liberal Mecca that people think it is. And I think a great testament to that was that not all of the candidates at the top of the pack, but, a good portion of the top six of them were real hard liberals, progressives, people from communities of color in some regards. People like John Barros, who had something called the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, where they've built more low-income housing than any other group in the city over the past years. These are the kind of people who really rose to the top of the pack and got a lot of attention. Now, when I was talking about the Norquist situation, that was early on in the race. I was basically saying to progressives, take a page out of that playbook. Look at, and one example was, had a bunch of progressive organizations gotten together and said, hey, we want all of the candidates. If you want to be a viable candidate, we want you to pledge maybe to put a moratorium on all Fannie Mae evictions, something of that sort. So that was really just, me playing, the columnist more so than the journalist, and saying, where is the power base? If it can happen anywhere, it's Boston.